might. In His presence lived my precious Savior, suffered pain and agony. He bore it all, that I might live. He broke the bonds of sin and set the captive free.
He bore it all,
that I might. In His presence live. He bore it all, that I might see His shining face.
He bore it
freely bore it all,
that I might.
I with Him might live. I stood condemned. He took my place.
He bore it all,
that I might in His presence live. They placed a crown of thorns upon my Savior's head. He bore it all, that I might live. My cruel man with spear, his side was pierced and bled.
He bore it all,
that I might in His presence live. He bore it all, that I might see His shining face.
He bore it
freely bore it all,
that I might.
I with Him might live. I stood condemned. He took my place.
He bore it all,
that I might in His presence live. Up Calvary's hill in shame, the blessed Savior trod. He bore it all, that I might live. Between two thieves they crucified the Son of God.
He bore it all,
that I might in His presence live. He bore it all, that I might see His shining face.
He bore it
freely bore it all,
that I might.
I with Him might live. I stood condemned. He took my place.
He bore it all,
that I might in His presence live. He bore it all, that I might see His shining face.
He bore it
freely bore it all,
that I might.
I with Him might live. I stood condemned. But Jesus took my place.
He bore it all, that I might live.
In His presence live.
Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away,
got to fly away
to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away,
got to fly away.
Oh,
I'll fly away,
fly away,
got to fly
oh
away.
glory,
I'll fly away,
got
to fly away.
When I die, hallelujah,
Oh,
by and
hallelujah,
by, I'll fly away,
got to fly away.
Just a few more weary days and then, whoa, I'll fly away,
got to fly away.
to a land where joy shall not end.
I'll
fly away,
got to fly away.
yes,
I'll fly away,
fly away,
got to fly away.
glory,
I'll fly away, got to fly away.
I said when
I
die,
Oh,
hallelujah,
hallelujah, by and by.
I'll fly away,
Got to fly away.
Oh, I'll fly away, oh glory,
I'll fly away, got to fly away.
Yes, and when
I
die, hallelujah,
Oh, hallelujah, by and by.
I'll fly away,
Got to fly away. Fly away. Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you worry there'll a victory to win? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be free from your passion and your pride? Power in the blood, power in the blood. Come for a cleansing to Calvary's tide. There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, there's power, wonder.
everyone. We are getting our thing set up here and starting with something new. We're going to have the logo in the back on a TV. And if I can get it to work, play. Oh, what? I don't want to. Oh, I want to. Well, if I can exit, I will. Right there. And it's giving me issues. Let's see. There we go. We want to play. And yay! Logo. I'm very proud of myself. That's technologically advanced stuff right there. Anyway, so let's go over to Studio 2 and see what Miranda's doing. And there she is. No, we're still holding on because Aspen is not with us yet.
Nobody told me about this.
Nobody told her about this. So thanks for joining us. We're obviously still working out our technical difficulties and things. So again, if you have any issues with video or audio, let us know. We'll kind of fix it in the process. So I guess we won't be going to Miranda in Studio 2.
Aspen says we're ready.
Oh, all right. Well.
Why I told you, I have no idea.
Yes, because it's time to check in with Miranda on things over there.
Weather's great. Kitty's sleeping. And there you go.
Kitty is always sleeping.
Yep. She's
Yes.
sleeping in the studio directly across from me on her blankie.
As all good studio cats should. Yes,
That's
it
right.
is. So, Miranda, how are you liking Texas?
I like it. Yes, while all our friends and family in other states more north of us are suffering from the cold, or at least temperatures that are dropping, and overnight into the 40s and during the day in the 60s and such, we are still sweating away down here in the 80s and low 90s, and I don't mind at all.
You don't mind at all?
No, I think it's great.
I'd like to have a little bit cooler weather, but
Just a hair.
Just a hair.
But
Just a hair. I guess that's coming. Although I think it's going to be a lot milder here during the winter time than it is in Nebraska and other places.
And I am looking forward to that too.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's kind of fun. Still getting to learn a lot of things about Texas, getting used to the Texas way of life, and here at Southwestern, where I'm at, and fun stuff. I've been working on a film festival contest, mobile media contest that they have done here for a long time, and it's been out for a couple of years because of COVID, but we're going to bring it back this year, and we're going to be just all online and stuff. It's going to be fun, where we're going to have a mobile media make your own movie contest. So that's kind of fun to work. There's things down here that are cool. I think we found a good Sabbath school class.
Yes, we did. And there's a fly.
And there's a fly.
Yes.
And that's what Miranda has to say about that. So,
Yes, we did find a great Sabbath school class, and so did Aspen.
yes, Aspen's getting very involved in the youth, and in fact, she's doing Sabbath school next week. Aspen will be teaching youth Sabbath school at the Keene. I don't know if it's called the University Church or not, but that's what it is. She'll be teaching the youth department's Sabbath school next weekend. And I think we're going to be making cookies or something. Is that right?
Yes, cookies.
Yeah,
Chocolate chip.
chocolate chip. So speaking of which, since we haven't shown one of her videos in a while, I thought we'd throw one in today. And since Aspen's going to be teaching Sabbath school next week, we'll show some of her advanced technological skills in making videos and talking about space exploration. I have noticed in the news lately, there's more stories about, well, the billionaires going into space on their, privately built spaceships and rockets and those kinds of things. And as you know, NASA's planning on headed back to the moon. And their new program is called Artemis, kind of a follow-up from Apollo. And so in Aspen's Object Lesson video, she's going to talk about how to get from the Earth to the moon and back and stay alive.
Today, we're talking about space travel. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. When you think of space travel, you probably think of what you've seen in TV and movies.
Look at that fleet.
Whether it's the Enterprise, an X-Wing fighter, a moon-based Alpha Eagle, or even the Rockhopper. Those all fly in space using constant power. But, big surprise, that's not really how it works. So to learn how flying through space actually works, we're going to look at how NASA figured out how to get from the Earth to the moon and back. December 12, 1972 was the last time any person walked on the moon. And that was the Apollo 17 mission commander, Eugene Cernan. And we haven't been back to the moon since, until NASA's new manned mission to the moon called Artemis. We've come a long way since the early days of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions. But one thing that the Artemis missions will use from the Apollo missions is the trajectory and navigation from getting to the Earth, to the moon, and back. But they won't be getting there flying straight and fast like the Millennium Falcon. They'll be using the two things that will really get you going through space: thrust and gravity. You see, traveling through space isn't like a bullet from a gun. It's more like throwing a ball to a friend. When you're playing catch, you usually throw the ball with a little bit of an arc. Without realizing it, you're taking into account thrust, how hard you throw the ball, and gravity, where the ball comes down. Now say your friend is moving. You're not going to throw the ball where they're at, you're going to throw the ball where they're going to be. And that is a lot more like how NASA got to the moon, rather than Enterprise jumping to Warp 9.
Engage.
Now there's a lot involved in flying a spaceship from the Earth to the moon and back. But we're going to look at the 5 most important navigational points that NASA has to hit in order to get an astronaut from the Earth to the moon and back safely. Navigational point number 1. The launch is probably the most important, because without it, the rest wouldn't happen. And launches can go very smoothly, not so smoothly.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition.
assume we had a very smooth launch and head on to navigational point number 2. You might think that when they launch a rocket, it goes straight from the Earth, straight to the moon. But that's not actually how it happens, is it? Remember our playing catch analogy? That's where this happens. Astronauts have to travel 238,900 miles to get to the moon. Translunar injection is where they line the spaceship up to where the moon is going to be when they get there, not where the moon is when they're lining it up. And if that goes well, then they don't jump into hyperdrive. They just burn their engines for a few minutes and then coast their way on to navigational point number 3. Navigational point number 3 is where they slow down, lower their altitude, go into a symmetrical lunar orbit so they can land safely. Once they get to the moon, if they don't adjust their speed and altitude, they'll just fly right by and watch the moon go by through the window and head straight to the sun.
Where they'll slingshot around and go into time warp and go back in time to save whales.
Once they've had a chance to walk around and pick up some souvenirs, they jump back in the spaceship and head off to navigational point number 4.
3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston.
Trans-Earth injection is just like translunar injection, except instead of going to the moon, we're heading back to Earth. Again, they'll burn their engines just for a little bit to pick up some speed, and then they'll coast their way to navigational point number 5. Re-entry is probably the most crucial, because if you get it wrong just by a little bit, you'll be watching the Earth pass you by. One thing the astronauts could rely on is that NASA had this all figured out way before they actually got into the rocket to blast off. And then, they trusted NASA's information on each point along the way to get them there and back safely. And just like how the astronauts had faith in NASA for their journey, we have faith in God for our journey. We have navigational points in our lives too, that God has already worked out all the details. Like it says in Ephesians 2:10, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." So blast off on the adventure of your life and know that God is taking you here, there, and everywhere, and all the way home.
So, that was fun, yes. We have actually several videos on space exploration. We did one on Mars and one on model rocketry, and it's lots of fun. Anyway, I really liked the parallel about the astronauts' journey from the Earth to the Moon and back. They had a lot of faith in NASA and the people that worked there. If you haven't seen the movie Apollo 13, that's a good one where, you know, they had the explosion on the spacecraft and they were trying to get the astronauts back safely. And they had to have a ton of faith in people they couldn't see and in things they couldn't see to get them back, to the Earth safely and, all the way back, splashed down and recovery and everything. And so I like the parallel. There's a lot of faith that happens, in the journey through space. You're relying on other people and somebody else. And a lot of times it's in, things you can't see. But you have faith because of your experience with those people beforehand and experiences you have had with people that kind of gives you faith for their ability and what they can do. And, there's all kinds of journeys like that. So like, other than the billionaires going to space, it's probably not likely that any of us are going to go to space unless somehow we get invited to be, ordinary citizen astronauts, which could happen. But there are all kinds of other journeys in life that we have to go through that also require faith. Our own kind of journeys through the unknown, and also like the disciples' journey through the storms and stuff. And we're going to have Miranda tell one of her stories, or at least start the story, about one of the journeys of faith she had to take through kind of one of her unknown storms that, was one of her mustard seed faith building experiences. So let's kick it over to Miranda in Studio 2 for her story.
Yeah, for sure. Stories of faith, God's faith building experiences that He's working out in us, aren't always fun. They certainly let us see the faithfulness of God towards us, but it's generally not a fun experience on the way. So anyways, this story happened, I think, probably about 8 years ago, and Brett needed to go to some meetings, probably about from Maryland to Michigan, so we jumped in the car and make a little road trip on out there. And I was driving because Brett had some paperwork he needed to finish up, and I saw some signs that said this tunnel was coming up. Well, first of all, I should tell you that I had suffered from claustrophobia, actually, my entire life, but for the most part, I had ignored that because I didn't suffer from panic attacks with that. So I knew by this point in time I had started having panic attacks along with the claustrophobia, and I saw these signs alongside the highway that said tunnel, thus and such a tunnel, thus and such a tunnel. And in my head, I said, oh, they mean some tunnel over there, because it was almost like they were advertising this tunnel. And so I ignored it. I ignored it until, of course, there was a tunnel directly in front of me, and I realized, oh, those signs meant a tunnel on this road that I'm on, and there was no time for turning around, because we would most times do that. If we knew a tunnel was coming up, we would find a way around it. Well, there was nothing to do but to go straight through it. And it was a bit of a tunnel. It wasn't just one of those little tiny ones. And when we got to the other side, I talk about good luck and fortune. There just so happened to be directly the opposite side of this tunnel was a pull-off. So I pulled off and I got out of the car, and there next to the freeway, I melted down. I, sobbed and shook and whatever. When it was over, I got back in the car, and Brett says, "Would you like me to drive?" And I gripped the steering wheel and I said, no, I will drive. And so I did, and off we went. So we're kind of continuing our talk from last week with the disciples in the storm. And I think that they found themselves in much the same situation. They were in a storm, and they insisted on doing it themselves, even though it really made no sense. Yeah. So if you missed it last Sabbath, we were doing the story from Mark. Matthew? Yes, Mark. Well, the story is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I chose to use the one based in Mark because you have Peter asking, "Don't you care if we drown?"
Yeah. So Jesus' disciples are making their way across the lake, and the storm comes up, and the waves came rolling, and the winds were blowing, and the lightning and flashing and thunder, and the disciples were bailing and about to drown, about to go under, and then Peter finally, in desperation and frustration, yells at Jesus, "Don't you care if we drowned or not?" And Jesus stands up and calms the storm and says,
"Peace, be still."
Peace, be still. And
that's interesting, though, that he said, "Peace, be still." He added on that "be still."
Yeah.
Because we often don't necessarily equate peace with being still. They, like the disciples, they were working hard for peace.
Yeah.
Jesus was just like, peace, be still.
Yeah, that's true. And we often think we have to work very hard for peace.
Yes, and they were doing the right things in the storm, and I'll have to say that my entire life, while I had claustrophobia, I did the right thing. What people said you're supposed to do. Don't let the claustrophobia stop you from doing things, and so I didn't. I would get on airplanes, and I got in elevators, and I'd go through tunnels and such, and I didn't give it too much of a second thought. I didn't like how I felt, but I chose to ignore that and press forward. I didn't let it stop me. And yet, by the time I reached my mid-40s, it seemed to make it worse. I did not get better because of that therapy, if you will. All of a sudden, it got worse. I had panic attacks with that, and much like the disciples felt, I think, it felt as if my boat was filling up with that water and ready to sink.
I remember flying on the airplane with Randy and Aspen when she was a wee baby.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't seem like it was too bad. You
No.
held it together pretty well.
Right. Because I was used to it.
Yeah.
And so you learn how to live
Mask
with
it and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get on the airplane and tell everyone that, I don't like how it feels on here.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work out so well.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think Aspen was having a wonderful time.
Oh, she had a wonderful time for sure. Oh, my goodness. While other parents sat there with their children who were behaving so quietly, Aspen ran up and down the aisles. Oh, my. It was, And her sister was a flight attendant on that airplane.
Yeah.
And such, so...
And we've never let her on a plane since.
Well,
because we're afraid she'll do the same
but...
thing, running up and down the aisles, talking to everybody, wanting to fly the plane herself. I don't know.
No.
Anyway, so yes, and so the disciples, were in awe of Jesus, and how did the wind and the waves, they obey this man. And so last week we talked about a lot of different stuff, but we said this week we're going to talk about, well, what should the disciples have been doing? Because, here, Jesus is like, where's your faith? You so little faith still. And the idea is, well, what should they have been doing?
Right, what should they have been doing? I thought you had a brilliant answer for that.
I did.
Okay, and?
And the brilliant answer is this. So, Jesus had said, let's go to the other side, right? So, here was the disciples with Jesus in the boat who told them, this is the plan. We're going to do this. And so, and the storm comes up, and it was very easy for them to get, terrified of the storm and afraid of the storm, even though Jesus was with them and he had given them the command, this is what to do. So, in the storm, what should they have been doing is just what Jesus told them to do. Keep going. And they probably were. They were, trying to, control the sail and bail the water out of the boat and da-da-da. And, we don't know. We can only theorize what would have happened had, instead of freaking out and yelling at Jesus, don't you care, we're all going to die. What would have happened if they would have said, well, we're in a storm. Jesus is still here, and he said to go to the other side, so let's just keep on keeping on. And, in theory, you would think no matter what, the storm would not have stopped them. Jesus gave them the command. Jesus was with them. It may have been a struggle, and it may have been a lot of hard work, but they would have gotten to the other side had they kept doing what Jesus had told them to do. And that would have been a whole different end of the story. At that point, they'd have gotten to the other side, and people were like, wow, that was amazing. You guys got across in that storm, and you didn't sink and drown and all die, and the thing would have been, yeah, well, Jesus was with us, so that's how we got across. It would have been more of a witness, in a way, to the power of Jesus and following what Jesus had told them to do. That's just a possible ending instead of, what did happen.
Yeah, a possible ending. And it just goes to show that despite their faithlessness, in the end, despite that, what did the faithfulness of Jesus tell them?
Yeah.
It said, I calm the storms. Well, you do nothing, because they didn't have faith. He calmed the storm for them anyways. He was still faithful to them.
Yeah. I guess you had to know, Jesus had to know what was coming. And so he had to know, we're going to get in the boat, we're going to get going, and there's going to be the storm. which way are they going to go? Are they going to keep on keeping on? Are they going to freak out? But either way, whatever, Jesus was faithful. So, right, even though they didn't, he was.
Right, and Jesus is bigger and can do more than we can imagine, but so many times we put him in a small box because we perceive that this or that is what he can or should do. And Peter and the disciples certainly did that. They presumed what? That Jesus couldn't calm the storm. They knew he was the Messiah, and yet when he actually calmed the storm, they were like, wow, who'd have thought? Who'd have thought?
And that's kind of our second one. Like our first point was like, what should they have been doing? What Jesus told them to do, and have faith that he would take them because he was with them. And the second point is what Miranda is saying, is that they had a whole, they should have known better, or should have had a different perspective, but they had, like you said, Jesus was in a box. Oh, this Jesus, really, they kind of put him on the same level as them, as like, we're all going to drown, and Jesus is going to drown with us. I mean, they didn't see the power that Jesus really had.
Yeah. And so we too put Jesus, we had these preconceived ideas of who God is and who Jesus is and what they can do or should be doing. And but what would happen if we believed that he could actually calm the storm? What would happen in our lives if we believed that Jesus could calm our storms? Would we live differently? And I tell you what, we wouldn't get all up in the air about the storms, would we? I mean, why? Why would you get up in the air about the storms when you know Jesus is there and perfectly capable? If not calming it physically around you, he calms your storm on the inside.
Yeah, I think it's easy to do the same thing the disciples did and put Jesus in a box, or put our own perspective onto God, and that, you know, we expect God's going to act this way, or we think God should act this way, or we think God should do this. Or the other side, and you hear this a lot, is why didn't God do this? You know, in other words, you know, he should have done what I think he should have done. There's a lot of questioning why God doesn't do stuff.
And it's almost like sitting in judgment of God. Like, well, you should have done this, or you should have done that, and why didn't he do the other? And that's judging God and his motives and his power and his wisdom and such. And so Jesus often acts differently and says things differently than we expect him to. Yeah,
because like our human nature and our personal life experience always influences our relationships with everyone around us, including God. And so we kind of put those on other people and on God, and think this is how, you know, God should act, or you know, this is what God could do and not do. And rarely did Jesus act the way the disciples expected him to act, because their culture, their experience, their perspective, you know, colored everything that they thought and the way they looked at Jesus. And so all kinds of things where he did something completely different than what they expected.
Right. How he acted with the woman at the well.
So the woman at the well, one, she was Samaritan. Two, she was a woman. Three, she was a woman of questionable character, you know. And all of this should have been far more than enough for Jesus not to even be within 50 feet of her. And yet they come back and Jesus having a conversation with this woman. Totally unexpected of what they think he should have been doing.
Right, and also how he treated the religious leaders of the day. I mean, treated them entirely differently than the disciples thought that he should be treating them. He should be currying their favor, he thought.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus didn't have to.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't have to at all.
And so Jesus was saying and doing things that were completely unexpected, or not what they thought he should be saying and doing.
Yeah, because he acted with a power that they were unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
And the power they acted with was love. And we think, oh, well, I know how to love. But that's our perception of how to love is often colored by our own personal experiences and our own wisdom, our own truth, rather than God's pure, unadulterated truth and love.
Yeah.
So.
And that was one of the things that you know, at this point they had been with Jesus for a while, and They had seen him do some pretty amazing things. They should. I mean, at some point, they may not have known what to expect, but they should have known what not to expect. At this point, they should have known, well, I think Jesus should be doing this, but he never does what I think he should be. So he's going to do something. I just don't know what it is. And instead of like, Jesus, don't you care that we're about all die? Peter could have been like, Jesus, so there's a storm. Things aren't going well. I don't know what you're going to do, but I know you can do something. So we're just going to, and you tell us, and we're just going to leave it with you, instead of freaking out.
It's true. So many of the storms in life, we want Jesus to do this or that, or give us this, or take that away, or whatever. And who are we to know how God should be guiding and directing our lives?
So they should have had faith in what they had already seen Jesus do to be able to take care of them in the situation they were in. But they let the storm scare them out of that. In fact, Ellen White says that a lot of people say this. Ellen White said it too. That the way God has led you in the past, the way God has taken care of you in the past, are promises for how He's going to take care of you in the future. And it also is like one of our biggest fear or biggest downfalls is that we forget how God has taken care of us in the past and fear the future. And that's what the disciples, where did all this, the witness of his, miraculous power of healing people and doing things and just feeding the 5,000 and all that's out the window because there's a storm. And the storm was controlling them.
Yes, absolutely. And so that takes us to our last point. Third point. Don't let the storm steer you.
Yeah.
So let's look at this from a different perspective, basically. The disciples appeared to be fighting the storm. They were fighting the storm. I'm sure they felt as if they were fighting the storm. But in all reality, weren't the disciples actually trying to make peace with the storm?
Tell us what you mean, Miranda. Well, I actually thought this was a good point.
Okay. So they may have been physically fighting the storm, right? But they were taking their instructions from the storm. The storm was telling them, be afraid, do more, try to save yourself, and doubt. Mm-hmm. Doubt the power of Jesus that is with you. Mm-hmm. And so that is what the storm was telling them to do. And they were doing it. They were serving the enemy, all the while appearing to fight the storm.
Mm. Yeah. And when she was talking about that, it made me think of the second time. There's another time, because you remember there's two storms that the disciples had to fight. And the second one was, after feeding the 5,000 and Jesus told them to go across, and they got caught in the storm. Ellen White talks about how they had already created this emotional, spiritual storm in their hearts and minds of doubt and fear because they expected Jesus to, I am king, and crown me king, and he would cast off the Romans and be the Messiah they all expected him to be. And when he stopped it all and sent them away, they were confused, discouraged. They started to doubt. They started to question. They started to get fear, and all this created this spiritual, emotional storm that, again, Ellen White talks about, then was a realized real storm as they got in the boat, started across the lake. And the storm in their hearts and minds was now the storm around them as well. And it was them allowing their storms in life to control them, and appear, like you're saying, fighting it, but they were actually taking all of their cues from it.
Right.
They were more obeying the storm than they were. Yeah.
Than they were actually fighting it.
Yeah.
They were living in an alliance with it, basically, because they were doing what the storm told them to do. Mm-hmm. So, see, when we fight the storm because of fear, fear, in a sense, has become our ally because it keeps us fighting the storm under our own power, because it's the only way we know how to save ourselves. Mm. And so, back to my story that I started with, it didn't end just there. There's more to it, thank goodness, for the power of God. Just a few months, really, after we had gone through the tunnel the first time, I needed to go out to Washington, from Maryland to Washington State for my oldest daughter's wedding. And it was in September, so Brett couldn't take off really from a teacher who had just started school for the year. So I wasn't going to get on an airplane because I was afraid of what might happen. And so I was going to drive out and with Aspen, and then Brett would fly out after I had gotten out there. And so I looked at the map, and I was quite sure that I was on a different road than had that tunnel on it. And so I figured, well, not to worry, even if I am on the same road with the tunnel, there's signs, and I'll see them. Well, I was just driving along, and all of a sudden, I didn't see a single one of those signs from before, not a single one. All of a sudden, there's a tunnel directly in front of me. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so, God always sets us up. He always prepares us for things. And what he had done that day was to prepare me with a devotional thought that, as I was reading it, it said, if you ever need help during the day, just call on Jesus for help. Just say, Jesus, help me. It was very simple, but I didn't have much choice. I was there in front of the tunnel, and I had no one else to save me. Later I realized that I usually relied on Brett as a safety, and yet it never helped me.
What?
I saw him as a person, and I was like, well, he's there. He's the adult that's there, and it felt safe.
I was never
helpful.
helpful.
Not safe. Well, no, it's not as though Brett wasn't helpful. Brett was as helpful as he could be, but it didn't take away the claustrophobia,
Right.
and it didn't take away the fear.
Yeah.
But because I could see Brett, I didn't stop to look further than that.
Right.
And so now here I was with me and Aspen, and I was the only adult in the car, and I knew I couldn't save myself. So that thought ran through my head. If you ever need help, just ask Jesus for help. And so we went to the tunnel, and I was saying, Jesus, help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus, help me. And I tell you what, the fear entirely disappeared. And it stayed gone, and like I said, it was a relatively long tunnel, all things considered. And once I got to the middle of the tunnel, I wanted to press back a little because, that's where it's dark on both ends, and you can't see any daylight at all. And so I started saying that again, Jesus, help me, Jesus, help me. And the fear went away, and instead of pulling over to the side of the road right there after the tunnel again, I was able to just fly right on out of there. And praise God. Oh my goodness. It was awesome. And honestly, I wondered if that was just a one-time experience or if it was permanent. Turns out it was permanent. I got on elevators to stay in hotels, and I went through other tunnels, and the fear was gone entirely. And so I finally told Brett after I had arrived in Seattle. And he was silent for a long moment. And he says, well, you must have prayed about that a lot. And then I was silent for a long moment, and I said, oh, actually, I didn't very much. I could think of a handful of times, for the most part, that I would tack it on at the end of a long list of other prayer requests. So why God chose to answer that one, I have no idea. I often wondered why he chose at that point in time to do that and to do it permanently. But I finally realized that like I mentioned before, it was... I had nowhere else to turn for help. So like the disciples finally realized Jesus was their only help. And I too came to that point of realization. I quit trying to do it myself. And so that's when God can do it for us.
What tunnel was that?
Which tunnel was it?
Yeah.
It was that one, it was on the way to Michigan, but I don't remember the name of it.
On the way to Michigan.
Yeah, it was we were almost to Michigan, I think, and it was somewhere between Maryland and Michigan.
That's Samo.
Yes.
Lots of tunnels to choose from.
Yes.
So.
Well,
Does Aspen remember that?
Oh yes, I loved tunnels.
Aspen loved
Especially that
tunnels.
one.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
Aspen's in the back going, wee. Yeah.
I loved going through, and especially the middle part
Yeah.
where you have the darkness, but you have the little lights in there.
All right.
I love the feeling.
So Aspen was on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to tunnels. I'm not so much claustrophobic, but I'm not a big fan of them either. But never have been. But Aspen's downfall, bridges.
Not bridges.
Great big bridges.
Not those kinds of bridges. I hate ramps that turn.
So later, We're going to help her spiritually grow over her fear of ramps. See, everyone has something. And I have airplanes that can fall from the sky because someone didn't tighten down a little screw. Everyone has something.
It was because Brett has watched too many
true disaster airplane stories.
Yes.
But
anyway.
But yes. So you find over and over again where God takes his people to that place. So the Israelites in the wilderness, over and over. We're going to die out here of thirst. Water from the rock. No, you're not. I'm going to take care of you like I did last time. Oh, we're going to starve out here. Here comes the manna. No, you're not. I'm going to take care of you just like I always have.
And oh no, the Egyptians are going to catch us. No, they're not.
No,
I'm parting the Red Sea.
Over and over God tries to, no, I would keep my promise. I will take care of you. And in those in the storms the disciples had to go through, and in the storms that we have to go through, be it tunnels or whatever our thing is in life, things that Satan throws at us, the storms that come, Jesus is always like, I'm with you. I'm with you in the boat. I'm with you in the storm. I've taken care of you in the past.
Yeah, and we forget, just like the disciples, that he's there. Yes.
And generally, Jesus will do it and do things in ways we don't expect him to do it. He'll get us through storms in ways we don't particularly expect. And just like the disciples, isn't it, in churches and everything you hear, and God did this for the people. And I was like, oh, praise God. And instead of like, well, of course he did. This is who God is.
Yes.
Yeah. And we're always amazed that when God works, it's like, why? And I think that's, again, like our perspective of like, we put God in a box. We don't allow God to be bigger than he really, our perception is.
Yeah. Yeah, and because you've been unemployed twice now for an extended period of time. And this last time, a friend of mine texted me, and she afterwards, after Brett, you got a job and such. And it was along the lines of, well, you held on with faith, and look what God did for you. And it's just like, it's not really like that.
Yeah, it wasn't so much like, we're gonna be, it was more curiosity, like, well, I wonder where we're gonna end.
Yeah. I mean, for us, I'll have to admit, for that, it's not as though we do that for every situation.
Right.
But when it came for Brett being unemployed, even for an extended period of time, and it was 7 months the first time and nearly twice that long the second time, when it happened, it was more of a, well, finally.
Yeah.
We expected him to do that.
Yeah.
And
we kind of knew there was something coming, and whenever it happens, then we'll know, okay, that's why it had to happen in that time frame.
Yeah.
Which turned out exactly true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the position I have now wasn't even thought of when I first started applying for jobs.
Yeah.
It wasn't even they hadn't even known there was going to be an opening. It was only until certain things happened along the way, and then it happened, and God had to take care of us, and there's not enough time to go through all the ways, that God got us through this time period, but, we got through this time period so that we could get to the place of where this position opened, and the timing was right, and it all came together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was one of those times that we could say, well, yes, of course he did.
Yeah.
Because we were planning on it, even though I'll have to admit, on occasion, you're like, well, what if he doesn't? Particularly when people start saying that to you. Well, what if he doesn't? You needed this, you needed that. And then you don't do that.
No, and
you
I wanted to
you keep waiting for God to get you that job that you feel like he's promised you.
Yeah. And I wanted to be Peter in the boat to go back and say, all right, instead of freaking out, I wanted to sit down next to Jesus and go, well, there's a storm here, and I know you're going to do something, so I'm just going to be okay, because I talk about it when we do stuff like this. So in the moment, I wanted to actually do that. So I would actually sometimes in prayer, I'd be like, well, I know you're here, I know we're here, and I know you got something, and I don't know what it is, so, just keep us going until we get there.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I learned was not to make any plans.
Yes.
Because God always blew those right out of the water. I don't know how many times. I planned several times, at least 3 or 4 times, that we were moving out of the house, because it made sense. It made sense to move out of this house that we couldn't really afford anymore, and move in with, you know, his mom or whatever. And every time it just didn't happen. And finally, I was like, well, all right, I can see it. I mean, clearly I'm not in charge of this anymore, so not like I ever was, but, you know, you like to think you are. Grand plans and, yeah.
So that's all worked out.
I did.
So we all have our storms. That was one of our storms in life. And you have yours, and we all have storms. And I actually like it when we share stories of, you know, with each other about our storms and how we got through them, because hearing about each other's storms, our own experiences, you know, really kind of helps strengthen our faith when we share how God has worked in our lives. It encourages not just ourselves but others. So we should always share our stories with other people, because it's a way to encourage and strengthen other people's faith as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if anybody watching has any faith-building stories, just share away. We'd love to hear them.
Mm-hmm. All right, I don't know that we know what we're doing next week.
No, not yet. I haven't the slightest inkling.
But we'll be doing something.
But we will be doing something, yes. Yes.
So thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll get some new videos made with Aspen. We keep planning and working on that.
Did you say planning?
Planning. And, of course, she has to teach Sabbath school, so maybe we'll just video that and show that. That might be fun. Anyway, so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you